I'll be speaking to Mark Colville, a longtime human rights activist and advocate for the unhoused. He's part of the Amistad Catholic House. I believe we last spoke when or before or after he was imprisoned in 21 for his anti-nuclear war protest. Good afternoon.
Hi, Stan. Good to see you again.
I hope we can talk about both your recent trip to Palestine and your work for the unhoused and how they might connect. Let's start with Palestine. How many times have you been there?
Well, this past August into September was my second visit there. I was there 15 years ago in 2009 after another Israeli assault called Operation Cast Lead,
Mm,
in,
mm.
in which, among other things, white phosphorus was used on the civilian population in Gaza. But yeah, 15 years later, I went back to find a more horrifying situation, actually.
What prompted you to go at this time, this last few months ago now?
Well, the easy answer is that I was invited, and I was invited by a Palestinian Center of Liberation Theology, which is called Sabil.
Ah,
Sabil, I believe, is the word for the way. Um, and so again, this is a Palestinian Christian organization, um, and they've been conducting these kinds of delegations and tours, which for the purpose of witnessing the violence and the factors around it, and also, it's a work of accompaniment for people, international accompaniment for people who are in grave danger, and so the presence of the international communities is crucial to their safety at this point. And so, yeah, I was responding to that invitation because, like many of my friends and many of us in the country here, we're just horrified and feeling paralyzed in terms of being able to do something about this genocide that our government now is actively colluding with Israel in committing. So when the opportunity, to join that delegation as an interfaith delegation, the main groups were Christians for ceasefire, rabbis for a ceasefire, and then a collective of Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists as well. So we were kind of trying to bring, the core message of all these faiths, which is peace and reconciliation and community and hospitality. That we wanted to bring a strong international faith-based presence into this context, and it turned out to be quite a group of very solid individuals, very gifted people, and some of them were, clergy members. Not all of them, but quite a few were. An international genocide expert who has studied genocides all over the world, and has been very influential at the UN. Was on the trip as well. So people were documenting this and the experience from their own both personal and professional perspectives, and turned out to be a very strong, not only presence, but then we also were able to make some public protests.
now, this is the West Bank, right? You didn't get into Gaza.
Well, we went to the Gaza border, and we prayed there, and we helped load some of the aid trucks that were making the crossing into Gaza, and which were subsequently attacked by the Israeli armed forces as they were trying to deliver food in there. Yeah, but no, we weren't able to get into Gaza. Similar to 15 years ago when we had brought hundreds of $1,000s worth of medical supplies. You may remember that you and I talked after that trip as well, and we ended up praying at the same border, actually, on the Egyptian side,
Mm.
at that point, and then having the medical supplies ultimately smuggled into Gaza. So Gaza remains an open air prison, and of course now it's a concentration camp in which people are being exterminated and starved.
Yeah. So how did you get into the West Bank physically? Where do you go?
Well, I flew into Jordan, met some people there, and it was about an hour's drive in over the over the bridge there, the Jordan River, and into East Jerusalem. Um, yeah, so we arrived in Jordan, and then the next day crossed over. I guess that would have been about the 26th of August, and we stayed for about 10 days. It was a very full trip. Actually, the getting into Jerusalem or crossing that border was was probably the most touchy situation. It's the low level harassment that goes on at that border is kind of notorious. In fact, there was
Mm.
a young man who from Britain who is a local politician. I think he's a member of parliament, if I'm not mistaken, in Britain. Uh, what he was, we were standing in the line at the getting processed by the Israelis to get in, and it was a long wait, and we're just kind of everybody standing around, and so this young man kind of absentmindedly took a picture of his traveling companion while they were standing in the line, and he
Mm.
was descended upon by Israeli soldiers and interrogated for about a couple of hours. Actually, we waited, and ultimately was not allowed into the country simply for having snapped a photo of his traveling companion as they were standing in the line. So
Wow.
the tension and the arrogance and the infliction of pain and aggravation on people is just so routine. It seems in every place we went on the part of the Israeli state.
Did you personally have any problem? Did they see your name in a list as having been there 15 years ago? Anything like that?
Thankfully, no. And again, that was a point of real tension for me. I was questioning internally whether I would even be able to get in. But yeah, I didn't have any problems with that. We spent the during all that time, we were constantly crossing through checkpoints on this. We had a bus. There were 20, I believe it was 29 people on the delegation, and so we were traveling around on buses and going through these checkpoints. Um, and on occasion, the soldiers would come on to the bus and just kind of ask for. Well, they would just inspect the bus, and I witnessed this twice. Okay, the soldiers would stop at the people of color that were on the bus and demand their passports. So
Mm.
uh, the only people that were asked whose passports were demanded were African Americans on the delegation, and then there were a couple of U.S. Based Palestinians who were on the trip, but nobody else was asked for their passports. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So where are the places you went in the West Bank and what did you see?
well, again, it was a full experience, and led by one of the directors of this organization, Sabil Omar Harami, who's quite quite a very dedicated organizer and activist and liberation theologian there, um, who and also quite a comedian. He kept everything very light in an extremely tense situation. But we traveled all around the West Bank into uh, uh, a bunch of different communities. Now the geography now of Palestine is so much different than it was 15 years ago in terms of its progression, the progressive um, theft and confiscation of land and the expulsion of Palestinian communities from the places where they've lived for millennia. And what we have now in the West Bank is essentially a bunch of or several small communities, Palestinian communities that are at this point only connected by roads, which the IDF routinely shuts down arbitrarily and at their will. And so the connection or Palestine as a contiguous place now or community in terms of Palestinians, it no longer really exists. It's a bunch of disconnected or communities that are easily disconnected. One of the communities that we visited just outside of Jerusalem was a place called the Tent of Nations, which lots of people are familiar with it. It's now become an international gathering place. It is actually a farm that again has been owned by one family for millennia, going back, I believe, to the 600s or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, they so this family, and they explained their story to us. The land confiscations go on unmitigated, and a lot of that is through legal processes that are completely corrupt. These folks during the Ottoman Empire, they were the people were obliged during the Ottoman Empire to get legal documentation for their land, and very few families apparently did that at that time. However, this family did, and they were able to recover those records and thereby stave off these court battles that have gone on to try to confiscate their land. Lots of it has been confiscated already. They're under an order not to build anything, so they do sometimes they build underground structures in order to house themselves and such. But they've been able to remain on the land. And again, as they literally said to us, their only protection at this point is the anger of the international community. And so we visited there and other places under similar kinds of threats. It's important to understand, and I kind of you get the sense of this immediately when you start visiting these places, is that what we have here is that there's the violence. Actually, this genocide scholar who I mentioned, his name is Mang Zarni. I hope I'm pronouncing his full name correctly. A Malaysian brother who and he, the way he described it, and this has actually been sort of picked up by the United Nations in some of their analyses. But he describes like a network or an environment, what did he call it? International kind. I'm looking for the term here.
No problem.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem of genocide. Okay, and what he meant by that, what he means by that, is that on the ground you have these so-called settler communities, these illegal. They're essentially vigilante communities on stolen land. They build these gated communities that look very much like something you'd see in Mar-a-Lago here. They build these communities all over the stolen land of the Palestinians, and they divert all the water there, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, there's the fringe extremists, and of course the settlements are made up of extremist communities, but the fringe of these communities tends to be, a lot of them are veterans who have trauma, as Israeli soldiers. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are carrying trauma and PTSD from all of the atrocities that they've been involved in. And so, some of these folks become violent vigilantes, and they constantly, they burn cars, they terrorize children, they hassle women, and they do it all with impunity. And the Israeli army soldiers, the active soldiers, are right there, opening the gates for them, protecting them as they're committing these atrocities and violence against Palestinian families. And then any response from the families or from the people being victimized by this is met with brutal force by the army. So all of this is being, the illegal, settlers are just terrorizing people with not only with impunity but with complete support of the Israeli army and the government. So it's a very scary situation, and again, we also, as I mentioned, the land confiscations. We also again another return visit for me was, and I was shocked, but 15 years ago in 2009, one of the visits we made was to a little neighborhood in East Jerusalem, just below the walled city. Silwan is the name of the neighborhood, and there was a gentleman there whose house was about 2 or 3 weeks from demolition. They had received a demolition order, simply again because at that time they were using the pretext of archaeological digging to take people who, again, for 1,000 years had lived in the space and are being evicted. Anyway, so the man, I remember back then, the man had been, in tears, and we were sitting in his living room as he was describing this. And anyway, we ended up going back to the same neighborhood, and we ended up at the same house. The man and his family had their home demolished back then. They rebuilt it and somehow had remained on the land. And just a few weeks previous to me being there again this year, it had been destroyed again by the Israeli government, and they had rebuilt again. They had rebuilt part of what had been destroyed, and they invited us there, and we had lunch there with them. And they had just received another order of demolition. So it's just an absolute land grab. These illegal court actions that are confiscating people's land based on the weaponization of the law. So again,
I'm sorry.
Just an ecosystem.
Did you get to Hebron?
I'm sorry.
Did you get to Hebron?
Yes, we did get to Hebron too. Again, in one of the farms outside of the city there. Hebron itself, we were supposed to go into the city, and the day we were going in, it had been shut down by the IDF. I should say that as we were proceeding on this delegation, and again, it went into, I believe we left on the 2nd of September, but the violence was escalating as we were there. In fact, we visited refugee camp Rafah, and it was 2 nights after we were there, and we were still in the West Bank. They raided the place. They went in with tear gas and firing guns and such. We saw some courageous people had taken some videos of that from their homes, outside their windows. Yeah, so I mean, it seemed like every place we visited, we were on the heels of the violent overtaking of these places. It was very, and then another place we visited right outside of Jericho, the oldest city in human civilization, as far as they were telling us. Lots of sheep farms around that area, most of which have been overtaken, and people have been unable to sustain living there because of the settler violence and the diversion of water and everything. Anyway, there are still a few farms and families that have remained there, and we went to visit one. And this is kind of a countryside, and we're on this big bus, so we're trying to. The bus driver intentionally drove up and down hills in order to kind of announce our presence, our international presence, again, as a way of trying to say, hey, that the world is watching. And then we ended up walking onto this farm and spending a good part of the day with this family, just trying to, normalized things. There were all these kids running around, many of them with anxiety, all of them really. One young man, and the night before, we were sitting with the family having a meal, and they were describing the night before there was a burned car right there, and the woman, the mother of many of these children, was describing to us that she had been awakened at 2 o'clock in the morning with a kind of a screaming, insane, army veteran apparently, who was yelling at her in her face, and she was sleeping with her children right there. One of the kids,
And he came right into the house and started screaming.
They came right in, and again, they burned a car, and they were physically abusing people. So they were describing all this, and one of the kids, must have been probably 8 or 9 years old, was sitting there, and he has like some kind of a developmental disability, but very communicative, but just a really anxious. He had a lot of anxiety, and he was very hard to. It was a very tough encounter, to try to get him to relax. We probably started playing, one of the clergy there started playing little hand games with him, and we started eventually kind of drew him out a little bit. But he had witnessed that the night before as well. And then as we were sitting there, he just he fell into a seizure, and this apparently was sort of a routine, or not routine, but a regular occurrence. And, his mom was right there and knew what to do, but it was just, when you attach the human suffering to this, get a sense of it, you just really, it breaks your heart.
Yeah. So you were in various areas. Trying to think. There's Nablus and there's Ramallah and smaller places. Any other things that you would like to tell us about?
Well, in light of what's just happened now with the expulsion of UNRWA, the United Nations organization that's responsible for whatever relief gets to Palestine, that they've just been expelled now. Now we visited them for a morning there, and they were describing the scope of their work. There's like 100 schools, 70,000 students. Of course, most of the schools now have been destroyed, but things like, for example, they were talking about the polio vaccine, right? That that there had been some agreement. Finally, the Israeli government relented so as to ward off a polio epidemic in Gaza, where they have obviously shut down and embargoed and kept their aid from getting in. They let the polio vaccine get in, but UNRWA, one of the things they were trying to tell us and the international community is that you have to have a chain of refrigeration in order to distribute that, and they simply can't do it because they're just shutting off the electricity at will. They're bombing schools, bombing hospitals. It's impossible. Their work has become more and more impossible. They were officially, labeled a terrorist organization by the Israeli Knesset, as you know. And now, and we're not talking about an organization that was thrown together in the past. This is the same organization that gave aid and comfort to Israel when they first were settling Israel. When all the Europeans were coming in and taking land there. That when Israel was first getting set up, that was the aid office that ensured that they could survive. Okay, and that's what they have systematically now dismantled. The only source of aid really that was available to them, and now they're intentionally starving. a whole population. And they're trying to, of course, now extend that to the West Bank. They're trying to Gazify, or they're succeeding in what they call Gazifying the West Bank. It's just you just struggle for words, you know. It's so cruel.
And do any U.S. politicians want to hear what you have to say? Any of the Connecticut federal officials, congresswoman, senators?
Yeah, you know, I've been very close to the the Yale campus protests here, and you know the campus encampments that sprung up last semester during the spring there, and yeah, I mean I've been joining them. They've been chasing these politicians all over Connecticut, trying to embarrass them for their support of this, and yeah, that's very depressing.
And we've talked a bunch about Senator Murphy, who at the beginning of this year, like February 2nd or something, talked about how UNRWA is indispensable in doing such great work. And then a week later or 2 weeks later, agrees to this awful compromise to ban any U.S. money going to UNRWA, supposedly
Yeah.
just for a year in return for humanitarian aid. I mean, give me a break. And
Oh,
so now you have the precedent, and they're never going to put it back in the conceivable future.
right. Yeah, and I mean, there's no other explanation for this except it's an intentional murder by starvation and deprivation of a whole population.
So you talked about Yale, so that's a good segue into New Haven and the work for the unhoused, the very poorest. So Amistad, if I have it right, Amistad House has been giving away food and food to the hungry for many years. When did that start?
1994. So we're into
Wow,
started
decades,
our
not years, decades.
31st year. Yeah. And you know, what we're doing here locally with regard to criminalization of homelessness really springs from our, you know, the mission, or sort of the, you call the charism of the movement that I'm involved in, the Catholic Worker movement. Um, you know, it has to do with hospitality, you know, trying to do hospitality in a radical way, where we try to gather, particularly, you know, low income, poor people, get them together, build safe spaces and communities, etc. And you know, traditionally we've done that here in the house. You know, you have a house of hospitality that we have an open door for meals and all of that. And yeah, but about 10 years ago, we started getting involved in particularly like tent city movements for this reason, because well, first of all, the United Nations did a study of U.S. cities. I won't spend too much time on this, but essentially the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights, you know, recognizes the human right of people to take refuge together safely on public land when the state fails to provide them with adequate housing. That's a rule that's sort of enshrined now in the international consciousness since 1948. Now, and the UN did a study of U.S. cities 10 years ago in 2013, and they found, you know, a plethora of laws, local laws in typical cities here that criminalize that behavior. That, in other words, they are blocking the assertion of that human right. So we felt, when we read that study, we felt, you know what, we don't. Not only do we need to take that seriously, we need to take it personally here in New Haven. You know, that we need to be about changing some of these laws. So 10 years ago, we started on a low level basis, sort of taking over unused property, and then inviting people who are already living outside because they won't access the shelter system, which is basically a criminal justice system. It's a system of jails, institutions in which people are voluntarily incarcerated in order to get a bed, and then they're sent out every day. So we felt we've been sort of attacking the city policies regarding this for 10 years, and we've been demanding that the city designate one or more parcels of land on which people can do this without being, brutalized by the police or criminalized. And of course, we get accused of being believing that people should sleep wherever they want, and that's what we say is that's exactly what the city's policy is. Because when you give people no place to go, they have to pick a place, and that's why people sleep on the green, under bridges, etc. Places where we don't necessarily want them to sleep. Okay, so we're just trying to say, hey, everybody has a right to a home. A tent is a home. People who live in tents are tenants. Okay, and they have the rights of a tenant. So failing to do that, we've been petitioning the city to designate land for this for 10 years. And we have failed. They haven't done that. We did set up a very successful encampment over by the river here, about a mile from the House of Hospitality, that was up for 3 years, started when COVID started, and they closed all the shelters. Hundreds of people passed through there and lived there during 3 years. But the city was even sending people there. Okay, you call the 211 helpline, and there was no place else to go, so they'd send people over there. So it was obviously a necessary service. But about a year and a half into that, and again, it lasted for 3 years, we realized that the city wasn't going to change, and that they were eventually going to bulldoze that thing, and wipe out everybody's stuff and everything. And so we got ahead of that. We decided at the Amistad House that we would declare our backyard to be public land. And then we started inviting people who were being expelled and evicted from encampments like that to come and live with us in the backyard. So we've constructed a supported encampment. The House of Hospitality now the door is open 24/7. And we have about 15 tents in the backyard, along with now 6 tiny homes, which is a project that supporters of this project of the backyard put together at a cost of about $123,000. They built 6 tiny homes housing, upwards of, about 15 people. And so again, everybody we have this backyard supported encampment, and in the house, everybody can access 24/7 the bathroom, shower, and kitchen, and laundry.
Did you build extra bathrooms? I would assume that would be
no. Actually, we're trying to catch up, because this has become such a popular thing that it's becoming overcrowded, and it has its problems in terms of being right here in the neighborhood. It's not ideal in terms of location, but it is very successful. Okay. Now around that, again, we've been taking on this as an issue, the criminalization of homelessness. So we started organizing with people who are experiencing homelessness. Okay. We set up an organization called UACT, Unhoused Activist Community Team, and Billy Bromage is another organizer that helped put this together 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And so what we've been doing is training people on how to exercise leadership, how to organize a campaign, how to fight City Hall to get policy and law changes that are going to serve people. And so we have a list of demands there, including obviously this designating, decriminalizing encampments by designating a land on which that can be done in a supported way. We're advocating for an entire village of tiny homes to be built, similar to one that has just been built in Providence, Rhode Island, and a couple of years ago in Burlington, Vermont. I believe there's upwards of 100 of these on a piece of land there. So we're trying to get to the city to reduce the incredible kind of misery that people who are homeless go through from being criminalized and moved on all the time, especially in the winter. Most recently, we decided to take this fight to the streets in another way. And that is, and many people in New Haven might be unaware of this, but it's been going on now for over a year, that the city now has a policy the state actually too has a policy where at the train station, people take refuge in there at night, at least like 24 people on a typical night. are taking refuge in there. So they started again over a year ago to just throw everybody out at 11 o'clock at night, and they can't come back again until the morning. So if you take a late train into New Haven, you'll see it. Every night, there's a bunch of people that have literally been placed out on the sidewalk in front of the train station, and they're sleeping there on the sidewalk, and people getting off the train just walk around them. Okay. So we decided that that's sick and inhuman, and that we were going to now accompany those people, and again try to set up a space where they can have, they can live in a tent and keep each other warm in a community space, and feed themselves and stuff like that. And we decided that we wanted to make this not only a work of hospitality, but also a public protest, a nonviolent direct action. We wanted to do this as close to City Hall as possible, just to bring to the mayor. Meanwhile, the mayor is cutting literally while we encamped on the green. We went and talked to the people at the train station who were getting expelled and said, look, we want to set up a safer space, and we want you to be there. So many of them took us up on that offer. We set up right behind the Congregational Church that's on the corner of Temple and Elm, which is right on the green. So we set up right behind there with some tents. We set up 25 tents. This is a week ago, Monday, with the intention of actually some allies like myself and some of the the Yale students have been involved in this as well. And so we set up 25 tents. In less than an hour, all 25 were filled with people who were unhoused. And so, and then the next day, the police came and they selectively enforced an old ordinance on the green that says you can't set up a tent without a permit. And so we took the tents down and decided to, again, sort of maybe taking a page out of the Palestinian liberation book, we decided we were going to stand our ground, or we weren't going to leave. So we started an encampment without tents. We just stayed there. We would have.
Of course, there was a Occupy New Haven. If I recall, there were tents on the Upper Green for, my gosh, 7 months, taking a wild guess. And
yeah. So this is part of the overall, the picture of criminalization of homelessness. It's the selective application of the law. You take a certain, block of people and say, we're going to criminalize you for this. But, like if you were walking across the green with a bottle of alcohol in a paper bag, you might. And if you didn't if you're carrying, a couple of book bags, as typically unhoused people have to carry everything they own, then, you're probably going to get addressed by the cops for that. But if you're a Yale student with a bottle of wine sitting on the bench on the green, I don't think they're going to. Anyway, so how it goes. The law is weaponized against poor people. They have these, these local laws that are not law. I mean, because they violate, any law that's not, rooted in human rights, or that blocks the assertion of human rights should not be kept. It should be broken. So we're kind of working with that concept here, and trying to train people as leaders and activists, to say, hey, human rights, like the right to take refuge, that's not something that you're given by a city government or a law. It's
Right.
not, or a constitution. It's yours by virtue of being human. Okay. And, when they're directly being blocked, you have to assert those rights. And so we're simply trying to get people a sense of personal and collective power in this way. Okay. One of the things that we realize from fighting these battles is that there is not one policy in terms of service delivery for unhoused people in the city, or low-income people in general. Really, there are no policies that encourage the building of community or the identity of neighbor, for instance. Okay, unhoused people the basic problem with homelessness is that people are not recognized as neighbors, and what we've come to believe here is that we don't have homeless people in our neighborhood. We have economic refugees, people who have been our neighbors, who have been excluded from the economy. Okay. And we decided simply, at Amistad, that from now on we weren't going to treat them like strangers anymore. We're going to treat them like our neighbors, and that neighbors in crisis in my neighborhood, I have a responsibility to them as neighbors. So we're just trying to figure out, first of all, to identify the boundaries that the city has set around our compassion for other people, and then try to, destroy those boundaries is essentially what we're about. But it should be important. It's important to make this connection. Okay, as I mentioned, the students at Yale, I and others in our organization, UACT, have crossed over and gone and supported protests for Palestinian liberation. I was part of actually a big action in which we shut down the train station in the name of ceasefire.
I remember that.
Yeah. So all along that time, I've been and we've been in dialogue with the folks working for Palestinian solidarity, and we've been trying to, and we have successfully kind of identified the same roots of oppression in both of these movements. Namely, it's the denial of personhood on the part of the system or the government, whatever, as a means to the denial of land, of neighborhood, of home, of existence, really, ultimately. So we see now, both in what's going on in Israel, Palestine, what's going on here in terms of criminalizing homelessness, we're recognizing the same oppression. So we decided with this action, with this encampment action, that again, we would make it both a center of kind of a rescue mission for people that are left on the street all winter, and also a center of protest, an aid station and a center of protest. And I think it's a powerful combination to raise up these two issues around these two oppressed communities, and it really puts a human face, I think, on the Palestinian reality, locally here. And so that's what we've been trying to do: build power locally to raise a voice, on behalf of both of these, stressed communities.
This is excellent. So last question, if people wanted to contribute money or goods to the various Amistad efforts, how might they do that?
Well, first of all, go to Instagram. You should be able to find our, the UACT has an Instagram page, Unhoused Activist Community Team, and there are options to donate to that organization. Again, this is the organization that's doing these active, protests and space, land takeovers for unhoused communities. And then we actually, the Rosette Neighborhood Village is the name of our backyard community, which I was describing before. And operationally, it's really expensive to run that, especially in the winter, with the kind of electricity output that, the city turned off the electricity. We had a whole electrical system hooked up to these homes in the backyard. The city shut it down on some very bogus manipulations of the local zoning laws, which I don't have time to get into necessarily. But the mayor, after we had gotten zoning approval actually for these tiny homes, the mayor did sort of a legal end around and was able to get the electricity shut off. And we just lost an appeal to get it turned back on. But it's putting a major strain on our operations in the backyard, and we're spending a lot of money in order to keep people warm back there. So Rosette Village rosettevillage.org is a place to go to get a sense of what we're doing in the backyard and how you can support it. And hopefully you'll find on that website on December 6th, there's going to be a big benefit concert for the operational costs of Rosette Village. And the headline act is going to be Tom Chapin, who people my age would know who that is. Kind of a hot folk music act. Anyway, that's in Meriden at this theater, a church converted into a theater on December 6th. And that, again, that's a big benefit concert.
And we can print out some of these details and put it in the comments, put it in the description of this YouTube.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So things are hot right now. I know we just had for many of us, a real sort of tragic electoral situation the other day. Would have been tragic either way. But, there's never been a more opportune time to hit the streets. And, we're here at Amistad, and UACT is here locally. And again, we're making these connections to Palestine and freedom all over the place. Also, I would want particularly people who are interested in understanding more about what's going on in Palestine. Sabeel, again, it's Sabeel. They continue to fight very courageously a nonviolent struggle there, and they're hosting these delegations all the time. There's a sister organization to that. It's called Friends of Sabeel North America, FOSNA. So FOSNA. Look for that online. They have a very helpful newsletter that you get constant updates about what's happening on the ground. They have a couple of weekly gatherings, one of which is like a prayer chain where they go through the sort of the incidents that have happened during the week, and they pray about that. And then there's another thing usually on Thursday or Tuesdays in which they have more of a secular kind of a talk about issues around what's going on there. So anyway, get hooked up with them in terms of being able to cut through a lot of the censorship and the blindness that's being sown in our communities about what's going on there. So,
well, thank you very much for this interview.
Same here. Thanks, Stan. Always good to talk with you.